The Scott School Pipe Band, everybody. And keep that applause happening for the previous wonderful acts who also kept us warm. To begin with, wonderful Melody Pool and also Northern Folk. Great to have both of those guys on board. And it's wonderful to have Hugh here in a park. I mean, here we were last year doing it from some little bijou studio in Pran. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel like the Albury-Wodonga winter solstice that we've come to know and love. But in fact, from that adversity, it's actually become a bigger and more widespread event. In fact, I'm going to wave now to the live stream audience on Facebook, because tonight this is a truly hybrid event and it will go beyond the borders of the Albury-Wodonga, which is a very exciting thing to see and to hear. And in fact, if you wish to hear any part of tonight again, or maybe you miss one section of it, you can always find it there on the Albury-Wodonga Winter Solstice page, and likewise to the Facebook page, which using the key search term of Albury-Wodonga Winter Solstice. It's a mouthful, but it's worth remembering. Also too, it's amazing to think, while Zoom, which we relied on last year, was great for connection, there is nothing like coming together, even if you're wearing a kilt and freezing in the wonderful Queen Elizabeth II Park. QE2, it's great to be back home and wonderful to have you here tonight as well. My name is David Astle, and I can't wait to introduce the calibre of and cavalcade of speakers that we have tonight and performers. You are in for a real treat. In fact, I chatted to someone just momentarily, Olwen, thank you for the chat and the kind words. And I said to Olwen, I hope you enjoy tonight. And she quite rightly said, I don't think enjoy is the word. I don't think enjoy, and you know what? I come to think on that. I've been sitting in the backstage thinking about what is the right word. And I hope that all of you find what you've come for tonight, and I hope you find a whole lot more, both here in the park and watching it on Facebook, because that's the kind of night it is tonight. So why winter solstice? Why do we choose the coldest, longest night to have an event like this? Well, the poetry is irresistible. The fact is, we have 14 and a half hours of darkness. And while that seems interminable, it's not. The darkness is not perpetual, and that is the central message of tonight. As engulfed as you may feel, or those you love may feel, there is light and there is connection, and tonight you're going to hear plenty of lived experience and opportunities for you to connect not just with the person beside you, but also too with professional services. And of course, there in the program, all those services are listed, and we will be referring to them through the course of the night. I'll get off very shortly because I do wish to keep things moving along. We do have a lot to get through, and we won't wish to keep you longer than you need to be here, given the conditions, but also given the mercurial talent that we have to come. So let's get things moving. And before anything can truly start on this sacred Wiradjuri country, I now wish to invite Darren Whiten, who is of Wiradjuri descent. He's also too an artist, performer. He's a cultural mentor. He came from Condobolin originally, but now calls Albury or Lavington home. And I wish now to call on Darren Whiten for Welcome to Country.
Thank you, Dave, for those kind words. Before I play the didgeridoo, the yidaki, that is an instrument that gathers people together in such a profound and haunting way, just thought I'd like to share briefly that something that's hard to say and might even be hard to hear, and that is that Aboriginal men are one of the highest in Australia and even around the world when it comes to mental health leading to suicide. And it's one of the reasons why this event is close to our heart and our family, and wouldn't be here to miss it for the world in that regards. Glad to be here in the flesh and not on video, as David mentioned from last year. And the interesting thing is that the Wiradjuri word for wind and the Wiradjuri word for spirit is the same word, birik. And so it's my desire tonight as I play this yidaki, this didgeridoo, that the spirit of our ancestors be with you and warm you and surround you, and that the wind coming at the end is a wind for change. around mental health and everything that involves while we're here tonight. Thank you. And now that we have your attention, the Radri Welcome Song, which I've been performing for some time now, and that we worked on together with Pastor Seth Grant, Wongama, proud Radri warrior and leader, and proud to be able to sing and share that song. Ngangira is part of the song. It means gathering, and we're certainly gathered tonight, but the important parts of this song are in the end. The Nungalana, sharing with one another. Wananga Gigalana, caring for one another. Great Radri word. And the best Radri word as a teacher, Yinjamara, respect, honour, be patient, and go slow. Take your time, be there for one another. Wambarna ginyani gindu gada, Wambarna ginyani gindu gada, Wambarna ginyani gindu gada, Wambarna ginyani gindu gada, ngaji gaga ngaji mingan, mana ngangira. Nungalana, Wanagagigalana, Injamara, Nungalana, Wanagagigalana, Injamara, Nungalana, Wanagagigalana, Injamara. Hey, Gwambarnaga Radri, Ngurumbang, welcome to Radri country. Mandangu, thank you.
Birik. Wind and spirit. Just wonderful to see the braziers and the beanies and the hat hair. So we just heard from Darren, while Zoom has been a bonanza for keeping connected, there's nothing like keeping connected as people. And I must admit, it was very much a waiting game that I was playing in Melbourne as the lockdown curtain was closing, then opening, then closing again. I didn't know if I would be here, but I really am just quite thrilled to be in front of an actual audience, a touchable audience, but you can't touch, of course, but we can touch you with the words from the speakers and the performers coming your way in so many other more profound ways. And in fact, I have to say, while it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful to see the Scots Pipe Band there in those woolen socks and the kilts in this 10-degree night, it's nothing compared to the James Fallon Wiradjuri dance troupe. I've just seen them slapping on clay on their bare backs and thinking, wow, that total disrespect. That is suffering for your art and suffering for the central message of tonight, and that is about connection and acknowledgement of First Nations people as well, which is, as Darren has just said, something that is of acute concern when it comes to those suicide numbers. While it's all very well to talk about 14 and a half hours of darkness, it's the numbers of suicide that we are trying to stop and reverse. Currently, it's something around 7 people a day in Australia, 2,500 people a year. And also too, 1 in 6 people live with anxiety, according to Beyond Blue statistics most recently, and 1 in 16 with depression. So that means that all of us either are facing these challenges or know those loved ones around us who are, or maybe we don't even know. So tonight is not just starting the conversation, but sustaining that conversation. So to break down that isocosm, that isolated world that we have been through with COVID, and we can't be through with our spirits and here in this park and beyond this park. So to keep the welcome and the respect happening, I now introduce the wonderful and intrepid in their minimal garments, James Fallon Wiradjuri Dance Troupe. Apparently I went rogue. I wasn't meant to introduce the James Fallon group only because it was meant to be as one cluster, and I'm so glad I did get to introduce these wonderful performers. If you could make them feel very welcome for their work.
James Fallon, Wiradjuri Dance Troupe, please. And I'm sorry I gate crashed your wonderful performance. We're just getting through with a little bit of sweet talk behind the stage there, exactly what the run sheet is. I did not notice that there were two performances there. Now it is my pleasure to go back to where I was previously, and that was that with Father Peter McLeod Miller, who is based at that institution, but he does not necessarily embody the bricks and mortar of that institution, because he is very much a maverick spirit within a traditional denomination. In fact, in that ABC compass, he talked about how the church needs to be the accelerator, not the handbrake, when it comes to implementing social change. And that very challenging words, but they're the words that sit central to Peter. So before I introduce him formally, I'd also like to give you a hint of what's coming after this, and that is Melody Poole, who is originally from Kurri Kurri, which is some 692 kilometres northeast, and she has come all the way down to regale you and hypnotise you with her incredible voice and song. And in fact, she has been described by Ella Hooper, one of her colleagues, as intrepid, which I think is ringing praise for a singer-songwriter. She sings truths, she doesn't sing pop. And Ian Shedden from The Australian has also called her an extraordinary talent, and that word is used only by, is usually overused. In this case, those words are true. So first, Father Peter McLeod Miller, hello darling, and then Melody Poole to follow.
Thank you, and in acknowledging the traditional custodians of our land, I'd also like to acknowledge the fact that we've been across the road there, across the grass there for 170 years. And in the old days, when people used to speak about prayer, it used to come out of a book, and now it comes from a community. And we are here, each one of us, because of something very deep within our lives and our hearts. And I'd like to say that this is the first time I've ever been out here to admit myself that I have also been in that burning building, surprisingly, and I'm very grateful to those people who helped me get out of it. And also to remember that this whole experience of mental illness and depression that can lead to tragic circumstances is written in the lives of each one of us, and it can be very isolating. And my next door neighbour, we grew up with, and David ended his life in a very tragic way. His sister said to me when I took his funeral, "Don't you dare try to make sense out of this. No more bullshit from the church, please." And so I tried not to offer more of that tonight. And she said that when they were young, up at the top of our street, he used to put her in his suitcase, strap it onto his skateboard, and let it go. And she said, when he died, she said, "I feel as though I'm back in that suitcase, in the dark, by myself, hurtling towards nowhere." And for each one of us, life can be like that. Tonight we do acknowledge that darkness that separates us, but also on this darkest night, joining all of our darkest moments together, we also acknowledge that that is also behind us, and we are looking forward to the future. And prayer is actually that. It is a deep longing with hope in its heart that looks forward to the light. And so it is also about change. Tonight as I was coming here, my new bishop gave me this rainbow scarf. That wouldn't have happened before, I can tell you. He must have thought I was getting cold. So tonight, we think about all those stories of our past. We carry them in our present, but also we are looking forward to change for the future. So for the courage of each person, for the prayer which holds a deep pain in the past, but also hopes for the light. We do give thanks for those stories, those people, for yesterday, today, and different tomorrow. Amen.
There we are. Hello again. Well, like many of us, I've also had my experiences with the Black Dog. The song I'm going to play you is called Black Dog, which I wrote during a time of distress. And I mean, I'm a big believer in feeling your feelings, even if they are dark. That's kind of what does get me through, rather than trying to make them better all the time. Sometimes it's good to just, for me at least, to sit in them and accept myself for who I am. I wrote this song about 5 or so years ago. It's called Black Dog. All I can taste is cigarettes and the kiss you left upon my lips. And I've left a number of old regrets, from my silken white legs to my hips. People often say there's no time in a day, but there's way too much time for me. I'm empty and aching, my whole world is shaking, and the black dog has sat at my feet. Nobody sees what I do to me. Nobody sees when I'm crazed. The contempt that I hold for my own defeat, and the guilt I feel masked by my rage. You waltz in the room in your drunken perfume, and you touch every inch of my being, until the bitter sun rises and shows our disguises. You stretch while I'm left there bleeding, then you step away, 'cause you're part of the day, and I sleep 'cause I'm part of the night. And you say my chains will soon break away, and I'll join you one day in the light. You push me and pull me, you ride me, you thrill me, then turn every inch of me down. And I have nothing and no one, so what could I owe to one man who is craved by the crowd? Break my hands, I cannot break them myself. And I see my own mind and the poisoning of its hells. Help is beyond me, but help won't come from someone else. You waltz in the room in your drunken perfume, and you touch every inch of my being. grab my hand, reassure me again that knowledge is so often free. And you say my chains will soon break away, and I'll join you one day in the light. But I'm empty and aching, my whole world is breaking, and the black dog is holding me tight. The black dog is holding me tight. Thank you very much.
Extraordinary. It wasn't overused, was it? And intrepid, that was also true. And in fact, in the last, I think it was in the last 18 months, someone we have lost along the way was poet Les Murray, who was a former guest here at the Winter Solstice. And it's wonderful to come back together as something of a secular congregation and remember what a champion Les Murray was as a poet. And in fact, he wrote a book called Killing the Black Dog. And there's a poem in there that I'll never forget called Corniche. And Corniche is that road that clings to a cliff as it zigzags its way down to the shoreline. And that's what it felt like for Les Murray. It feels like that for so many of us at various times, in fact. And about the black dog, Les Murray wrote, "Adrenaline howling in my head, the black dog was my brain, come to drown me in my own breath." The good news is the name of that book was called Killing the Black Dog, if you haven't come across it, and it is Les's own personal struggle to overcome and live well and flourish, to go beyond that possession that the dog can sometimes claim on our own lives and our own mental health. And if you'd like to get some of Melody's work, you can look for the award-winning album called Deep, Dark, Savage Heart. I said, "Are you doing any more gigs?" And she goes, "In Adelaide." So I'd suggest that you also travel to Adelaide to see that extraordinary voice and performance there in the room. When I was down at Norriel Park this morning, just having a coffee, doing a crossword, gathering my thoughts, I saw a 5-year-old girl who was on roller skates. And she had a mum beside her who was not a helicopter parent at all. In fact, if you're here, Mum, I love your work. You allowed your child to balance, to fall, to lurch, to teeter, to glide. And I think there's that skater girl in all of us. There's this sense that we're all just streaming along, that we are smooth, that life is easy, but in fact we are constantly lurching and overbalancing and overcorrecting and second-guessing ourselves and not quite feeling stable. And I'd have to say that the next speaker, I think, could possibly relate to Skater Girl if we all can't. Her name is Georgie Dent, and there is a motto that beware the dream life. And it's certainly a motto worth keeping when it comes to the social media cult of everyone presenting their best selves forward. And we can start to think that our lives are lesser than, or we need to match those lives that we are seeing. So constantly we're evaluating our lives through the eyes of others, which is a really corrosive way to think. Georgie was she was a top lawyer, and in fact was a top, and she's gone from essentially being a top lawyer into a top advocate for mental health as a result of her own personal, physical and mental breakdown. She'll be talking about this, I'm sure, and if not, you must seek out her book called Breaking Badly, How I Worried Myself Sick. So from worrier to warrior, as now the Executive Director of the Parenthood, which is a community of mothers and fathers who are advocates for the health of children, including that skater girl down at Norriel Park, and also too as a contributing editor to the Women's Agenda, which is a news hub all about leadership, technology, business, politics. Sorry if I'm being too quick, Jess. But
Also, most importantly, Georgia is one of those people who has realised the importance of self-care and what self-care means and what it looks like. And if that is not one of the most wisest discoveries in life, I don't know what is. If you could make her feel very welcome, Georgia Dent.
Thank you so much, David, for that introduction. I do need to say that I am from Sydney, and while I sound sick, I can guarantee I don't have COVID, so please don't be afraid. And just please bear with my voice. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Wiradjuri people. I would like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I would like to acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. It always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I would like to extend my gratitude and thanks to Annette and Stuart Baker for bringing this event to life and uniting the local community around the enduringly tragic and prescient subjects of mental ill health and suicide. It is one thing to find light in the depths of darkness, but to set about creating light in the dark for others, as the winter solstice does, is an extraordinarily generous gift. I am humbled and honoured to be here tonight. It was almost 2 years ago when I first heard from Annette. She reached out after she heard an ABC radio interview I did around the time my book Breaking Badly came out in 2019. In it, I describe my experience with mental ill health, and I will touch on that shortly. But on reading through the package that Annette sent me about this event, about winter solstice, my heart broke. How could it not? Like so many of you here, and many, many more who aren't here, who can't be here, my family has been affected by suicide. In 2011, my cousin Sam, a son, a brother, a fiancé, a plumber, a country boy, and an absolute larrikin, died by suicide. He was 32. His story is not mine to tell, and I will not dare to put words around the grief and pain that his family, his immediate family, have experienced. But I will say that sitting in a tiny church in a small town in far western New South Wales where he lived, which was packed to the rafters and beyond with more than 500 friends and family gathered, will never not be one of the saddest days of my life. The vast and inexplicable chasm between how loved this young man was and his death remains excruciating. But Annette didn't know that when she invited me to join this event. I shared it with her when we spoke, as I do with you tonight, to say I do have peripheral understanding of the grief and pain of suicide. I think the sad fact is we all do, or we all will, which is why these conversations and this event, in lifting the lid and fighting the stigma and pain that makes these topics so difficult, I think that's why it matters. At age 24, I was a freshly graduate junior solicitor working in a fancy Sydney law firm. A few weeks after my 25th birthday, I was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. 4 months before my admission, I had taken extended leave without pay from work and moved back in with my parents in northern New South Wales, as I was unable to function and live independently. At the time, this felt like a rude shock. I could not for the life of me fathom what had happened. 1 minute it felt I was an ordinary participating member of the community, and the next I was unable to look after myself. With hindsight, I actually came to find it more astonishing that I lasted almost 25 years before I broke. The phrase nervous breakdown is not used in medicine anymore, and it has no agreed upon medical definition. It's an umbrella term that describes a period of intense mental distress where physical and emotional stress becomes intolerable. impairing the sufferer's ability to function effectively. That description matches my experience well enough for me to say, unequivocally, that I suffered a nervous breakdown. Ostensibly, my breakdown began when I fell over late one night in my office with a violent spell of vertigo that I assumed would pass as quickly as it came. It didn't. I woke up the next morning and I was still dizzy, I was nauseous, unsteady on my feet, and I had a cracking headache. It persisted for the next 4 months. That first episode of vertigo was the beginning of the end, but it wasn't the beginning. For 12 months prior, I had been ignoring the worsening symptoms of my Crohn's disease. Crohn's disease is an autoimmune condition. It's an inflammatory bowel disease. It's ugly and it's painful. While Crohn's ravaged my body, I pretended to the outside world that I was fine. I had internalised the illness as proof of what I concluded was a biological deficiency. And I spent my days trying to compensate for that. I was determined that I would work as long and as hard as anyone else. I would show no weakness. I ignored that I felt constantly panicked, that my heart raced the whole time, that I would burst into tears at the drop of a hat, that I was terrified all the time. And so I managed to be genuinely shocked when this vertigo came along and ruined my charade. This debilitating dizziness was a different kettle of fish, and I couldn't ignore it. And so instead, I went in search of an explanation. I saw 5 GPs, 2 ear, nose and throat specialists, 3 neurologists, a neurosurgeon, 3 gastroenterologists, a physician, a counsellor, an acupuncturist, a naturopath, a yoga guru, 2 osteopaths, a dietitian and 2 psychiatrists. I had CT scans, MRIs, neurological assessments, and countless blood tests. I told and retold my story. No one could explain my spinning head. At the time, I believed I was losing my mind because I was losing my body. Soon enough, I discovered I was losing my body because I had lost my mind. It was a physician in his early 70s who looked me in the eye and convinced me of that. He looked at me and he said, "Georgie, in my experience of nearly 50 years treating patients, every time a patient presents with unexplained physical symptoms, the explanation is always stress." He said, "I'm not saying this is in your head. It isn't. The symptoms are real." His advice was that I should see a psychiatrist immediately to discuss medication and treatment, and that a stay in a psychiatric hospital would be ideal. That my immediate response was relief was telling. Despite the fear and apprehension that my situation had deteriorated to a point where psychiatric intervention was required, I was more afraid of not having an intervention. The 4 months before that day were hellish. I had spiralled very badly into a dark place. I quite honestly believed there would never be a day where I would feel well enough to spend a day on my own, let alone live independently. I adored my parents, I still do, but my bucket list for life had not involved spending my days rotating between my childhood bedroom and their sofa. I didn't want to end my life, but I didn't want to live like I was living. Every appointment that failed to deliver an explanation for my spinning head and my weakness felt like another nail. Not in my coffin, but in hope. Every appointment that provided no solution left me convinced that what I was feeling was in my head, that I had become entirely untethered from reality, that I was imagining, that I was dizzy, that I was sick. The kind physician's diagnosis rested me from that nightmare. He gave me an explanation and he gave me hope. I promptly embarked on what can be described as an intensive, immersive course in the treatment of mental ill health. I was prescribed medication. I went to a psychiatric hospital where I spoke to psychiatrists and psychologists daily. And I went on a pretty radical journey in terms of my own understanding of both mental illness and mental health. I came to understand that what I had come to accept as just the human experience, living in that constant state of panic, shallow breathing, self-loathing, crippling perfectionism, pervasive fear, was actually a symptom of living with untreated and unchecked generalised anxiety disorder. By treating that disorder with therapy, medication, and motivation that I know I was lucky to be able to muster, I recovered. And I came to accept that life didn't need to be as miserable or as difficult as I had accepted. And when I say I recovered, I mean I regained my physical health and my mental health improved considerably. But I continue to live with and manage anxiety. Despite my life becoming much easier after I was treated for anxiety, my life is not a Disney film. I didn't live happily ever after from that moment on. In this short amount of time, I cannot adequately detail my recovery, but there are a few lessons I learnt that I would like to impart tonight. And the first is around privilege. I was and am incredibly privileged. I had so many safety nets to catch me when I fell. I had family who were able to support me physically, logistically, and financially when I couldn't. I had private health insurance that made my stay in a good psychiatric hospital possible. I had friends and family who loved me. I would never tell my story without pointing this out. There is no doubt that I had a better shot at recovery because of the emotional and financial support I had access to. But equally, I need to point out how that privilege became corrosive for me. Knowing just how lucky I was in so many of life's random lotteries meant I felt I had no justification for struggling or suffering. Privilege became another thing I punished myself with. Mental illness doesn't discriminate. It is possible to be incredibly privileged and live with horrendous mental ill health. Even while writing my book, I struggled with this. I questioned whether my story was valid because of the good fortune on my side. What does a white young woman born into a middle-class family with all the privilege and stability that affords have to complain about? One evening during the writing of my book, I posed that question to my husband, not for the first time, and his response compelled me to persevere. That is exactly the point, he said. And he was right. Having a good job, having a loving, supportive family, having friends is no protection from mental ill health. I broke with all the love and comfort in the world. And I think this is something that is really important for family, friends, and loved ones to remember as much as anyone who is suffering. If your child or your parent or your best friend or your husband is struggling with mental ill health, it's not a reflection on something you are or aren't doing. The illness doesn't discriminate, and all the love and support and good intentions in the world do not in and of themselves constitute treatment. The other thing I want to talk about is loneliness. I have never felt as lonely as I felt when I was breaking, and yet I was physically surrounded by people. I was never alone during that time. I felt like no one had suffered the way that I had suffered. And I know when I say that, I might sound like an egomaniac, but I just think the experience when you are struggling feels so lonely. And I genuinely believed that there weren't other people living in the pain that I was feeling. And the saddest thing for me about writing my book has been the number of people who reach out to me. When the book first came out, it was at least daily. The book's been out 2 years now, and I would say I get at least 2 messages a week from people, mostly young women, but definitely men too, who say they've read my book and that I'm telling their story, that they're living that pain right now. And I'm always struck by how invisible that struggle is. David mentioned, social media. And when I had my breakdown, which was 13 years ago now, 12 years ago actually, 12 years ago, social media wasn't a big thing. Facebook did exist, but Instagram wasn't around. I didn't have the pressure of social media. When I took my hiatus from life, I didn't have to put up with the pressure of social media and trying to keep up. But I know that in this year, in 2021, all around us, people are struggling in big and small ways. And not every struggle is going to eventuate in the worst case scenario. Not every person struggling is going to require a stay in a psychiatric hospital. But I think that we do ourselves and our friends and our families and our colleagues a disservice when we pretend that we're all okay. Because I know now that I wasn't alone when I was breaking. There are so many people that were in the trenches in the same depths of darkness that I was. And that's why when Annette reached out and said to me that the reason they host this event is to shine a light on that darkness, I couldn't accept the invitation fast enough, because I think it is so important that we stand up and be honest about the fact that we're struggling. I think we need to look around us and recognise that things are not always as they seem. Thank you so much for having me tonight.
Breaking Badly is the name of Georgie Dent's book. And I've just heard, in fact, that we've been breaking all sorts of record numbers as well on Facebook. At this stage, we have over 15,000 people, in addition to you, gallant souls here at Albury. So thank you so much. For those on Facebook, tell your friends, spread the word. Evelyn Araluen is a poet. She is of Bundjalung heritage. She's an educator and a researcher. And in fact, there was a wonderful piece that I saw in the Border Mail where Evelyn was talking about poetry, that is art in general, but poetry in particular, can shift conversations. In fact, can foster solidarity and compassion. And if I can play word nerd just for a moment, I think compassion has got to be the cornerstone word of tonight. It literally means suffering together. So on the back of what we've just heard from Georgie, this whole notion of us understanding that we are all vulnerable, all of us, and that together as a community we can be a lot stronger. Passio gives us passion. We suffer for what we love. It gives us passive, but we can't afford to be passive. And it gives us patient, both someone at a clinic as well as what we all need to be with those that we love and those that we are close to. Evelyn's work has come together in a book that has been hailed as one of the most salient voices in Australian poetry. It's called Drop Bear, and there's a wonderful line in that. It's about how hard it is to unlearn a language. And I know that that is more about colony and about occupation, but I'd also like to think that we can unlearn the language that is so negative around mental health, to unlearn the shame and the stigma around suicide, because only then can we start to shift the conversation. Evelyn Araluen.
Jingibala Nyarina Evelyn Araluan. I'm incredibly honoured to be sharing this space with you tonight. I do want to acknowledge my respect, my honour, my reverence to Wiradjuri peoples and to their country, their ongoing custodianship. Thank you, Uncle, for welcoming us here, and for those adorable frozen little children for dancing for us. It's truly an honour to be in this place, in this country, and to be a guest here. And thank you for inviting me, because this is a topic I care about quite a lot. I have written quite a lot about mental health, my own experiences, my family's experiences, the experiences of those who are loved and very close to me. I feel very strange reading a poem that actually explores my own history with mental health and isolation. It's sometimes a lot easier to talk about other people than it is yourself. But that's what we're all doing tonight. We're all breaking down the languages and the structures of alienation and isolation that make us think that we shouldn't talk about what we've been through. So this is a poem called Interior Anxious. It was developed with the Big Anxiety Festival, which is a series of events attempting to explore mental health, particularly with a focus on depression and anxiety and the impact that that has on our society and on our communities. With thanks to the Big Anxiety Festival, with thanks to Winter Solstice, with thanks to Annette and your beautiful family, I'd like to share this work with you, Interior Anxious. My interior scrapes furniture across a floor I won't clean, dressing windows with dreams that don't look me in the eye. Nothing's quiet at night when you make it your only living. Light breaks so much, and ghosts aren't meant for the day. My insides sleep in doorways like I'm waiting for this to fall. Outside, the wattle bird cracks dusk from dawn, where the moon slips blue-eyed through the slithers I allow myself to give her glimpse of how far it's gone. I know every crevice of this crypt. It's soft, it's sorry, it's sleeping. But this house is not a home, is not a hearth to tend or a corner to curl in curtain glow. I promised you I'd clear space in this aching mess, but you've never seen such a clutter rupture, never held such an empty pen. I'm tearing shadows from the dark, teaching myself to dream in repetition. Spirit and spectre dancing silhouettes through halls while I watch seasick and desert-mouthed, this fluorescent Holocene screen tracing room from hollow room, dangling feet from every edge to test how much this living wants. I don't want to call, just to write in white to give the empty something to eat without showing the bones. They said, what you give space will be given before time in a future past this present, split ribboned by what we refused and what wasn't ours to keep. But we don't get time every way that we want it, and we don't get what we want every time. You told me, give it a morning to unpack and a night to breathe out. If it crawls out the window, it was never meant to be housed. None of this is to say that I'm healing or that what's here is ready to rest. It says, I lost my days to my mind. I didn't get what I wanted when I gave it my time. And now my interior hoards light like I don't deserve it, playing dress up in disasters that wear like paper dolls. It's to say, we're grasping through distance and disorder, and I'm still here, despite a history conspiring to kill me. But the unutterable of living when you make living a choice is that a mind can make monotony of anything. can drag bodies room to room till the horror is a floating sheet in a dusty house. From the window, this might look like breaking, but from the sky, it's only ghost. Thank you so much for sharing this space with me. It's an honour. Stay warm.
And the name of Evelyn Araluan's collection, which I urge you to chase down, is called Drop Bear. And the poetry is as good as you've just heard from that wonderful piece. There's, in the Inuit languages of Alaska and British Columbia, there are these phrases about knowledge. And I won't try and pronounce the words, but I can tell you what they mean, because there are various levels of knowledge in Inuit culture. That is, someone knows about something, that's the first. Someone has heard about something, that's... Hey! All right! There you go. Those 14 and a half hours just got a little darker. Lights will come back on, but at least we have audio. And maybe while you find your places or grab that brazier spot or down that non-alcoholic glühwein, I shall resume my discussion about the Inuit words of knowledge. Now, the other word of knowledge, in fact, I might need to have my phone on. I quite like this actually. It's a little bit like improvise literally means doing what you can't foresee. Improvisere. That's what we're doing right now, people. Let me get it right. Hello. Good to see you. How is everybody? Thanks for coming. Actually, now I can't see you. Could you turn those lights off again? Let me get back to those Inuit words of knowledge to say that the third nuance or level of knowledge is he is not ignorant of something. And then the fourth one, which is my favourite, he doesn't know where to look because there are so many seals surfacing on the ocean. But really, the best word from any language that I've come across in terms of what is knowledge is a word from Jaru, which is a language of West Kimberley, and that word is mangir, M-A-N-G-I-R, which means to have ears. Because ultimately, to know something is to listen and take knowledge from those who do know, who have lived experience, and that knowledge is the sort of knowledge that Linda Burney, Member of Parliament, will be sharing with us very shortly. She's of Wiradjuri Scottish descent, and in fact, she was the first Aboriginal person to serve for the New South Wales Parliament. That was back in 2003, which is a groundbreaking and phenomenal milestone, and the first Aboriginal woman elected to the House of Representatives in 2016. Before then, she was, I know, it's extraordinary, isn't it? A round of applause. That is a real milestone. And she's still serving. She's still staying staunch. And she's here tonight, although she was worried about the lack of lights. She goes, what's happening? And then we both realised that we can't solve the problem, so maybe we shouldn't fret. And thank you for all those people who did great work just getting the power back on. But Linda, she has been so many things and worn so many hats, including as a teacher, where she realised that there was so much more that she could do as a teacher, and became involved and instrumental in developing the first Aboriginal education policy in Australia. She served on such boards as the Anti-Discrimination Board, the SBS Board. She's also served with the New South Wales Aboriginal Education Consultative Group. She has been involved and making real and lasting changes across Australia. She is the Shadow Minister for Families and Social Services and for the prevention of family violence, still living strong and still making real differences in people's lives. If you can feel very welcome, Linda Burney.
Well, thank you so much, and hello Albury, Wodonga and surrounding areas. Can I firstly recognise that we are on Wiradjuri land, Balam, Ambul, Wiradjuri, Yindamara, Marang. And thank Darren for his welcome to country. I am from the Murrumbidgee Wiradjuri, so all day from just outside of Canberra driving down here, I've been in Wiradjuri country. And I'd like to thank the Wiradjuri dancers who are now not shivering, you'd be pleased to know, and having something to eat. The pipers were just magnificent. There is nothing like a pipe band. Can I recognise also my fellow speakers tonight, Kerry and Georgie, and thank you for your bravery and for telling your story. I would also like to say that the winter solstice is something that's very special. And there are many thousands of people watching tonight online, and I say hello to all of you, but most especially hello to you that have braved the cool weather to be with us this evening. I understand it's going to rain here in Albury on Wednesday, so I think we're pretty lucky, don't you? Yeah, so do I. Can I just say that Annette has said, please don't mention my name, so I am. So to Annette and Stuart, and the inspiration and the bravery of what you've done, and the many volunteers that make tonight happen, and everyone that's performing. What I want to share with you from an Aboriginal, from a Wiradjuri worldview, is that our culture is about storytelling. And tonight, my friends, I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story about a young Koori man. He was kind, he was loyal. He came from a home that had always good economic, financial stability, but not everything was right in that home. Sometimes it wasn't right. This young man, when he was 4 years old, saw his mum and dad break up, and he tried to stop that happening. It affected him for the rest of his life. When he was 4, that happened. He remembered the arguments and he wanted to make them stop. He saw his mum in a violent relationship that was he's only 9 or 10. He experienced bullying at school. He was handsome and he was gentle and he was loyal. He was a young gay man. He was fair complexioned, which made him really examine his place in the Aboriginal world. He was deeply loved by many, especially his sister and his mother. His first attempt on his life was at the age of 18. He fought his demon, including drugs. And like Georgie spoke about, there were many times he was in psychiatric units. He took his life at the age of 33. It was 3 years ago. His name was Vinny, and he was my son. So where has Vinny's mum got to? I took great pride and joy about the equal marriage legislation that was passed in the Parliament about 2 years ago, almost 3. It's meant so much to my boy, and for me, it was a nod to my son. But you know, for a young person taking their life, it is difficult no matter what the circumstances, no matter what the age. But this is how I have dealt with it. And I've had a little bit of practice. I respect my son's decision. I never questioned it. I never, ever questioned myself. I did not ask why and what else could have I done, because of the respect I had for my son and the bravery of his decision. I have a daughter. They were so close, and she needs her mother. She has an intellectual disability that came about when she was 22, and her brother sat with her every single day for 12 months in the hospital. And I'm not afraid to say that I got help. I saw a grief counsellor. My husband had passed away 15 years before. He was 53. And I knew how it rocked and rolled. I remember very clearly, 3 months after Rick died, my husband, standing doing the washing up, looking out my kitchen window onto a garden that I had made that was beautiful. And I thought to myself, I can let this define me for the rest of my life. He was so young and he was so important to this country. Or I can take something from this to make me a better person. I chose the latter. And you've heard the word compassion tonight. I am a much more compassionate person because of the gift that Rick gave me. I don't know yet what the gift is that Vinny gave me, but I know that one morning I will get up, or one evening I'll go to bed, and I will know what it is. So, you have to establish really where you stand with yourself and where you stand with your grief and what you are going to do with that grief. But what I do regularly is talk to both my husband and my son. Sometimes I'm cranky, sometimes I'm not, but talk to them like they're still there. And that gives you enormous comfort. I've kept 3 items of my son's that meant something. And the thing that's most precious to me is a blue jumper, because I went with Biddy and that was a gift that I bought him. I take comfort from knowing that he is at peace. I haven't spread his ashes yet, but that's the next step, and I know where it's going to be. I'm ready to do that, but his sister is not. And when she is ready, she will tell me, and we'll make a ceremony and do it for him. But I have learned also that you have to pace yourself. You don't have to find the answer straight away. And being wise and being respectful is the most important thing that you can do. And I want to finish up by saying this, that in the Aboriginal worldview, death is a part of the cycle of life. You come from the earth and you go back to the earth. Life for us is not linear, it's circular. And when you know that, And when that's part of who you are, it helps. It is not linear. It doesn't start, it doesn't finish. It just keeps going around and around. And what a special way to think about someone that you love desperately, that you're incredibly sad about, but you respect the bravest decision that boy could have ever made. It must have been difficult. But for those of you that have lost a child or have lost someone that you love, respect their decision and don't ever, ever question yourself, because that rips you to pieces. And the last thing that they wanted was for you to rip yourself to pieces. My nephew hung himself about 6 months ago, and his mum has come to me to share her experience, of course. And I said to her, do not question yourself and keep hydrated. Otherwise you faint. Boy, did I learn that the hard way. So everyone, thank you so much for listening to me tonight. And here's to my boy, Binny Dirumbarong, Kirkbright, Bernie.
I'd now like to introduce Northern Folk just for a time of reflection, and then we'll have Kerry O'Brien to finish after this. It's the Northern Folk.
Thank you, Linda Bernie, for the great advice. Do stay hydrated. This is we're going to finish up with a song of Paul's. This is a song that you can listen to online if you like. It's under Paul's personal project, Paul Dyson. And I think that it reflects on something that we've heard a lot tonight, which is not pretending that you're okay when you're not, which is obviously easier said than done. And I've been thinking about that every time we come back to winter solstice, because it is something that we say every time. Don't pretend, don't pretend. Be forthright, be honest. But anyone who's had any kind of mental health issues will tell you that it's so hard. I think all we can really do is encourage more and more people to do it. And it might take years and years and years, but it'll get better once the greater amount of us are all doing it together. This song's called I'm Doing Fine.
Well, I'm time rich, and I'm piss poor, and I stink of denial. All my thoughts are in discord with this mustered up smile. Still, it must be worthwhile, 'cause everyone is doing the same. Oh, and I long for the laughter that I knew as a child. Now I'm 5 times as old, and I'm half as inspired, just kicking the tires and hoping I'm not solely to blame. Well, I'm doing fine. Don't that just roll off the tongue? And it's not by day mind's too unwieldy to unwind. But given some toil and time, well, I'm doing fine. Sometimes when we speak love, well, I only hear static, and you perceive that as simple and not symptomatic. I assure you there's more than just moths in the attic upstairs. Oh, and I can cry more quietly if that's what it takes to put you at ease. You know it's not in my nature to bear all my teeth. It's the hunger that makes the wolf wild. Well, I'm doing fine. Don't that just roll off the tongue? And it's not by day or design. More scared of the shine than the gun. My mind's too unwieldy to unwind. But given some toil and time, well, I'm doing fine. I'm doing fine.
Thank you.
I promise not to use the word abstruse or recondite because we have signers up here. I won't use any arcane vocabulary or use any opaque idiom or figurative language that will really confuse what the hell I'm saying. I met a bloke in the elevator last night. He was pushing a trolley, a luggage trolley, and I realised that he was trying to keep 1.5 metres from everybody. He was just walking around with this trolley. He wasn't. His name's Robert K. Champion. He's a modern day storyteller. He's a singer, he's a balladeer, and he's going to follow as our final act, our final speaker, who's asked me to be succinct, so I will. He is a journalist extraordinaire who's been on our screens and in our lives for over 50 years, Kerry O'Brien.
Thank you, David. I'd like also to start tonight by acknowledging the traditional owners of the country we're on tonight, Wiradjuri country. Pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and particularly to acknowledge that we're on country whose sovereignty has never been ceded. And I don't think we can say that enough. In fact, I know we can't. And every time we say it, we are acknowledging a profound truth and a profound and ongoing injustice whose pain continues to be felt from the brutality of our colonial past. I also want to say that what I'm about to talk about, I do so very much within the front of my mind, the knowledge that no matter how much pain we non-Indigenous people may have felt around the subject that we're talking about tonight and that you're all here for, that we magnified that pain when we consider the issue of suicide amongst Indigenous Australians. And it is just another mark of that injustice. Tonight, I was going to, and in fact I'd very carefully prepared some comments that I thought might be useful to reflect on about the state of our country and its impact on our mental health. And it was never quite right until I confronted the fact that what I was avoiding really was spending serious time talking about my brother. I was going to talk briefly about Paul and then go on to these other things, and I've basically thrown that away. And I'm going to talk substantially about Paul Gerard O'Brien. On the 27th of August 1952, at the age of 7, I received a telegram. I was staying at my grandmother's place, my grandparents' place in Brisbane. My mother was giving birth to her fourth child. He was to be my kid brother, in Warwick. And the telegram said, "Baby boy born on Kerry's birthday." Paul was not expected. Paul was not planned. And when Paul arrived, he was special. He was particularly special to my mother. Special partly because of the circumstance of his arrival, but also because she sensed something vulnerable in Paul. And she was right, although it took a long time to manifest. Paul and I shared a bedroom through my teen years. Even at that age, in my own foolish way, I wanted to ease his path by making some things a little easier for him than they might have been for me. Instinctively, I wanted to help Paul. He was very bright. He was full of curiosity. He was a compassionate human being even in his young years. There was an instinctiveness, an instinctive kindness in him. He excelled as a sportsman. He played in the first 15 as fullback at his school in Brisbane. And for those of you almost Victorians who are steeped in Australian rules, I'm talking about rugby. He also competed at state level in athletics. After university, he tried various career paths, not really sticking at any of them. I had no doubt that had he been able to apply himself, he would have had a successful career. But he always veered off, and eventually he became a globetrotter. At one point, I saw him as a vagabond in the most romantic sense of vagabond, and I told him so. He didn't like that. He saw it almost as a pejorative term. Paul eventually was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and things began to make some sense. And so he would come and he would go. He would disappear overseas, he would come back, he would work for a while. He couldn't sustain his work. At times, he would live in a combi van and he'd drive the combi van around the country. What we didn't really know until later was how many friends he was making and how many lives he was touching. He would periodically drop into my home in Sydney and rekindle his bonds with my children, and then he'd go again. And that was his life. He represented no harm to others, and we thought no harm to himself. When he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, our mother confided in we siblings, but we weren't allowed to acknowledge it to Paul because he had sworn her to secrecy, he thought. And she had made that promise to him, but of course she's a mother, and she felt she owed it to us and she owed it to him that we should know. But we couldn't talk to him about it. And then he was diagnosed with aplastic anemia, a blood disorder, which was almost certainly going to be fatal because it required a bone marrow transplant. And my sister Barbara, my brother Tony and I all tested, but were not compatible. And the doctors explained to us that the odds of them finding an anonymous person somewhere out in the world who would be compatible were infinitesimal. So, in Paul's 40th year, my wife and kids and I came up to Queensland, as we always did around Christmas, to spend a week with my parents in their retirement on the Gold Coast. And Paul moved between the Gold Coast and Brisbane, and then we were going up to the Sunshine Coast for a week. We saw Paul, but he was not in a good way. He was having to go to the hospital on a very regular basis and sit there for hours having transfusions. And on one occasion, my brother Tony and I went with him. And we got to the hospital and Paul was getting increasingly nervous. And as we went to get into the lift, he pulled back and he said, "You're going to have me committed, aren't you?" I said, "Paul, I don't know what you're saying. This would not have occurred to us. Why would you think that?" He said, "Because the psychiatric unit is in this hospital." And we had to slowly persuade him to join us in the lift to walk up to where he was to have his transfusion. He was standing there at the lift door sweating. And when he did eventually hesitantly come into the lift, he stood looking at us, shivering. He was like a cornered animal. 3 days later, as we were preparing to leave for the Sunshine Coast, I got a call from Paul. He was just calling to say goodbye, he said. And we talked briefly. We said our goodbyes. And as I got into the car, I said to my wife, "There's something that's not quite right." And I felt very uneasy. When we arrived at our hotel on the Sunshine Coast, there was a message to ring my sister Barbara. Paul had walked off a roof at the CWA hostel in Brisbane, where he was staying because he also used the Brisbane hospital down the road. He hadn't died immediately. They kept him alive until I got there. We said our goodbyes. And the memory that I will take to my own grave is of looking into my mother's eyes. Never mind my own grief, but looking into my mother's eyes and seeing the raw pain and the agony. And that lost look. This woman who had nursed this boy right through his life, trying to come to terms with what had happened, and that this was his departure. And so, this is the first time really, apart from a few fairly carefully chosen words that I put into a memoir a couple of years ago, this is the first time I've really spoken publicly about it, and I guess in the 28 years since that happened, I parked that grief privately, and every now and then it would just come back and revisit me. And it's only now, as I face trying to put these things into words, And I'm doing it for me, I realise, as much as I'm trying to do it for you, that I understand how important it is that we share, and how the denial of grief is itself a canker that eats away at us and erodes us, and how brave you all are. You know, we saw two remarkable women tonight on this stage, and what an extraordinary year it is for strong, passionate, compassionate, powerful, brave, injured women who are coming to the fore in this country to inspire us all. As a journalist over 50-something years now, 55 actually, but who's counting, I have seen the progress of mental health debate, and I've seen the course of the development of our capacity to deal with mental illness. And it is, of course, there are some great and inspirational moments, and there are some wonderful people, health professionals working in mental health. But this is a saga of neglect. It is not a sexy political issue. And the stigma that I witnessed as a child and witnessed as a journalist all those years ago has not left us yet. We see prominent people finding the courage and the need to come to the fore and talk about their own mental illnesses for the good of us all. And you think, well, maybe we can move past the stigma of mental illness. Maybe we can. And then I see, for instance, a young, talented tennis player named Naomi Osaka forced to tell the world that she's been suffering long bouts of depression since she won the US Open in 2018. And she's felt compelled to do that because it's the only way she can justify not turning up to a press conference and being stigmatised for that. So when I see the mishandling of that situation and how that compounds the pressure on her, that tells me that we still have a very long way to go. And when I remember back to my childhood and the way the man who lived on the corner, he would have been in his late 30s, I guess, he had a couple of kids. He was unremarkable, really, but he communicated with other people in the street. Everyone knew his name. They knew his basic story. And then one day, the word was sort of around that he was having troubles. And then he disappeared for a while. And when he came back, he was a very different man, and the word filtered out. As my mother explained to me some years later, he'd had a frontal lobotomy. And in my young mind, I noted, because I've recalled it since, what a different presence he had after that. He had no job from then on. He couldn't hold down a job. But he would climb onto the bus with his satchel and he would sit straight, staring fixedly ahead as he drove alone or rode alone on the bus into the city. How he would walk around the streets, and I have no memory of anyone. I cannot remember seeing anybody talking to him. I can remember as a young journalist being overwhelmed as I reported on an institution, a mental hospital in Melbourne, where some whistleblowers were starting to reveal the kinds of things that were going on behind the scenes, which really were reflective of many mental health institutions, not just around Australia. Reflective, I might say, of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, for those of you who've read the book or seen the film, where people were basically reduced to a vegetative state, where they were tranquilised virtually out of existence, often as out of convenience. And so what passed for treatment was really a sham for so many of those people. And then as we did the stories, more and more people would ring up to talk about their own circumstances. And in the end, after months of this, I had to walk away from that story. So 50s, 70s, 90s, when my brother Paul was treated in silos with his physical ailments and his mental illness, these things were seen as separate things. And when he was in hospital for his physical treatments, staff would complain that he could be difficult. And they were not seeing the reason for the difficulty was Paul's anxiety and determination to exercise his right to question what they were doing with him and what the treatment was. And the other silo of his mental health treatment was over there. That was the 90s. And we have to ask the question still today, how much further do we have to go? And how much really has changed? I still now, in my 75th year and my 55th year as a journalist, I still hear stories that are echoes of the past, of people who fall through the cracks in the system, of people who present to hospitals in crisis, are treated, are let go, back into the community, back into the situation where the crisis developed, and some of whom do not survive because the community support for them that our politicians tell us is there is so inadequate. So we can take some little joy from the last federal budget, where we see $200 and something million has been allocated to treatment centres and to suicide prevention. But from everything I have seen and everything I know about government's treatments of mental health is that promises in the past have almost invariably ended in disappointment. And while you can take some relief and some reassurance and even some pride in your own contribution to the debate which has led to this government's acknowledgement that this is a problem that desperately needs to be responded to far better than it has in the past, what we have to keep in the fronts of our mind is that you do not relax. There is no relaxation on this, because what is given can be taken away, and what is given almost invariably turns out to be way short of what it needs to be. I wasn't sure, to be honest, that I would get through talking about this tonight, but I'm very pleased that I have, and I feel enormously privileged to have shared the stage with those who've been here tonight. But the reason that I have come is to pay my respects to Annette and Stuart Baker and to all those others of you who have become a part of this very special process, to confront yourselves, but confront the rest of us as well, with the anguish and the pain which is at the heart of this. And to tell you that you are doing something special which flies in the face of the direction our entire world is going at the moment. The democratic world is lost. The democratic world is in an enveloping crisis. The democratic world is polarising. Our politicians are polarised. Our media is polarised. We live in a privileged and wealthy society. We're living in exciting times where there is breakthrough after breakthrough on so many fronts that promise to improve our lives, that promise us so many things. We have never been in a technological sense, more connected in this globe than we are now. But this world is full of contradictions, because while we have this connectedness, we also have extraordinary isolation. There are so many lonely, anxious people walking the face of this earth and walking around this country who are struggling for help, to help them out of that isolation, out of that anxiety, out of that alienation. Connection is so much a part of what we require to lead a healthy existence, to live in a civil society. We are losing the capacity to talk across a growing divide. Once upon a time, we didn't think anything remarkable about talking politics with people who might have a different political view to ourselves, different social views to ourselves. I think we are on the way to losing that capacity. And mental health is very much at the heart of what I'm talking about here. It is fundamental. So I want to leave it there, but again say to you, this has been a marvellous experience for me to see you turn out in the depths of the Albury-Wodonga winter, to do what you are doing, to say what you are saying, and to hope that what you're doing here will grow, and that more and more people will come to understand that in community lies strength. We find compassion amongst ourselves. We learn to talk more openly with each other. We learn to be kinder to each other. Thank you very much.
Hello, hello, hello. There we go. Guess it's not really a winter event unless there's somebody sitting down in footy shorts and a footy guernsey. You know, just raise your hand if you're that person here tonight. No? Thanks again to the organisers for inviting me down to a wonderful event.
Great to have you.
Thank you. I was obviously choked up by listening to a lot of the stories, the poems, Auntie Linda as well too, and stuff and that. And we're all connected, I guess, through obviously family loss, you know, through suicide. I lost somebody special to me many years ago. Well, not many years ago, but long enough to remember him, and obviously the good things he had, the qualities, and, you know, the things that we thought we didn't do to, you know, obviously help him out and stuff. He was a very young guy, obviously had a lot of talent, a lot of potential. You know, we all tried to get him back into the city, to get back into his art, into comedy and all his stuff, and he just, you know, obviously he was that person, but there was obviously something that wasn't sort of sitting well with him. I wrote this song when I did some songwriting for my album. It's called Pain Away. I wrote it with Warren H. Williams. We wanted to write a sad song, I guess, with a happy tune, with a happy feel, so obviously people wouldn't feel so sit back and be taken back by a sad song. And it just talks about, I guess, how low people can get when they're that low that they have the only way out is obviously to pick themselves up again is by, taking themselves out of this world. So I just want you people to know we are there to help, just talk to us. At the end of a tunnel, there's a light. It's the only light I see. And in my head, I hear voices screaming out for sanity. So I hide in the darkness with my pain and misery, and I find strength in this needle as it takes my pain away. As I walk through my nightmare, the light it fades in front of me, but my sorrow won't let go. As death sets me free, so I hide in the darkness with my pain and misery, and I find strength in this needle as it takes my pain away. As I walk through my nightmare, the light it fades in front of me, but my sorrow won't let go. As death sets me free, so I hide in the darkness with my pain and misery, but my sorrow won't let go. As death sets me free, this song is something I wrote when I was up in the pitlands in the remote area of South Australia, close to the Ayers Rock. It just talks about, I guess, being lonely up in obviously in the remote area, and obviously being, comforted by your surroundings.
kettle's boiled and I'm just chilling in the kitchen, watching the moths dance off their reflection from the light on the street, trying to write songs and correct all my bad wrong, hoping there's someone out there who thinks of me. 90 miles of dirt road from the nearest town, busted cars and broken hearts in between, listening to old country songs on the stereo. It's a mixtape somebody's made for me. But have you ever watched the moon dance on a dirt road and making colors of the rainbow at night, and where the sound of the breeze blowing through the trees helps me forget that I'm alone here tonight. Next time I'll get it right. "90 miles of dirt road from the nearest town, busted cars and broken hearts in between, listening to old country songs on the stereo. It's a mixtape somebody's made for me. But have you ever watched the moon dance on a dirt road and making colors of the rainbow at night, and where the sound of the breeze blowing through the trees helps me forget that I'm alone here tonight, helps me forget that I'm alone here tonight, helps me forget that I'm alone here tonight. Next time I'll get it right.
Thank you. Robert K. Champion is his name, and the CD that I'm sure you would love is called The Road Is Too Long. A big thanks to all those who've made tonight possible, and also a big thanks to having with us Christine Morgan as well within the audience tonight, who's the CEO of the National Mental Health Commission, which is a really wonderful thing to see, and great to get the support from the federal government about this initiative that Kerry O'Brien so articulately singled out as being such an important initiative, and one that I hope will create a lot more inspiration for similar communities, other communities across Australia and across the world, to make winter solstice as being that time to come together to remember. And in fact, I'd have to say that the collective noun for rememberers and for advocates and for agents of change in mental health has to be a solstice. So tonight, a big thanks to all the caterers, to the volunteers, to the COVID marshals, but also let's hold your applause as I read out the wonderful participants in tonight's program, from the Northern Folk to Melody Pool, the Scott School Pipe Band there and their knock knees to get started, to Darren Whiten for a wonderful welcome to country with Didge Solo, James Fallon, Wiradjuri Dance Troupe, to Father Peter McLeod Miller for leading us in that inspirational prayer, for Georgie Dent and those really important messages about self-care and knowing who to turn to, knowing about those safety nets, for Evelyn Araluen for that haunting poem, for Linda Burney MP, and our big heart and shout goes out to her son, Benny. What a wonderful message. I'm reminded of that incredible line from Mayor of Easttown, learning to live with the unacceptable. And also too, to Kerry O'Brien and to Robert K. Champion. And let us not forget the wonderful Jess and Will for signing things tonight and doing such a masterful job. To the techs who managed to get us back online, and to all you on Facebook. We've had over 15,000 watchers of this event. So many wonderful shared stories, remembered loved ones, and comments from across the world, from Ireland, from Canada. It's been inspiring and great to think that this small idea can have such a huge implications around the world on social media and in other parks just like this. But most of all, a huge thanks to the Albury-Wodonga community for believing in this event, for supporting this event, and for helping this event to grow, just like that little red tree down here in the foreground. It's been a wonderful night to be here, and there's a Willa Cather quote that I'll finish with, and that is talking about the wonders of the forest. But when it comes to the quote, I think it actually talks about the wonders of a night like tonight. The quote is this: to be discovered in something complete and great. This has certainly been great, but it's not complete. And I'm urging all of you to spread the message on Facebook, to share the light, to let people know they're not alone, that compassion is the only way we'll get through this, and advocacy and activism. Compassion to live, to suffer, to take on the challenges together. And those numbers, if you need them, please, Lifeline 13 11 14. The Beyond Blue number is 1300 224 636, and Headspace, which is right there. And the Fire is too. We haven't forgotten you as well. But thank you everyone for making this winter solstice a memorable and really meaningful night. Thank you.